They say the desert keeps your secrets, but mine never learned how to stay buried. My name is Clara Jean Moore, and I live in a town so small that people still wave when they pass each other on the road. Not because they're friendly, but because pretending not to would be louder. I teach art at the high school on the edge of nowhere, paint sunsets that no one buys, and used to believe that love, real love, could grow even in dry soil. For 36 years, I lived quiet. Then, on the day I was supposed to start my forever, the silence broke, and everything I'd built turned to dust. When you grow up in the Nevada desert, you learn early that beauty and danger live in the same place. The sunsets look like heaven, but the heat will kill you if you stand too long in awe. Maybe that's why I fell for David Lane. He came to our town from Reno, smooth-talking, with a smile that felt like shade. He wasn't loud, but his silence had weight, like there was always something behind it. He told me he'd grown up in a family that never stayed put, chasing opportunity, he said. I thought maybe I could be the place where he'd finally stop running. He was a contractor then, helped fix up the old school's roof, came by my art room with paint on his hands and questions in his eyes. He'd linger after class, watching me wash brushes at the sink. Said he liked the way I treated color, like it was alive. We married 2 years later. A small ceremony, early autumn, in the little stone chapel just off Highway 93. I remember thinking that morning, everything I love is right here. My mother crying softly, my students from town leaving wildflowers on the steps, the desert wind carrying the scent of sage, and David standing at the altar, looking at me like I was the last good thing left in this world. I should have known that kind of look never lasts. The first sign came before the ceremony even started. My best friend, Ruth, had been helping me get ready, curling my hair, pinning my grandmother's lace veil. She was quieter than usual. Her hands trembled just enough for me to notice. "You okay?" I asked. She smiled too quickly. "Of course. Just nerves, honey. It's a big day." When the music started, she squeezed my hand, not in joy, but in warning. I didn't understand until later what she was trying to say. The chapel was small, 15 pews, white flowers on the ends, light streaming through dusty stained glass. When I walked in, I saw David waiting, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. I remember how his face softened when he saw me, how the light caught his eyes, how his lips moved just enough to say, "You look perfect." But as I reached the front, I noticed his hand gripping the ring box tighter than he should have, and I thought, he's just nervous. The pastor started speaking, words about love and patience, about how marriage was two souls made one. But as he read, I saw movement, a woman slipping quietly into the back row, late, wearing red. I didn't recognize her, not at first, but David did. I saw it in the way his shoulders stiffened, the way he stopped breathing. Her name was April, and I would learn later that she wasn't just anyone. We said our vows. We exchanged rings. We kissed. And in the corner of my eye, I saw April stand, tears in her eyes, and leave before the ceremony ended. I told myself I imagined it, that she was just some stranger overcome by sentiment. But when we stepped outside and the wind picked up, scattering the petals from the church steps, I caught David staring after her car as it disappeared down the dirt road. It was a small look, a split second, but in that moment, something inside me cracked. Not enough to break, just enough to whisper, "Something's wrong." The reception was in my mother's backyard. Paper lanterns, homemade lemonade, a record player skipping old songs, people laughing like joy was simple. David was there, smiling for the camera, holding me close for the first dance, but he wasn't with me. Not really. His eyes drifted past me more than once, like he was listening for a sound no one else could hear. Ruth kept watching him too, and after the cake was cut and the guests began to leave, she pulled me aside. "Clara," she said, her voice breaking, "there's something I need to tell you." But before she could, David came over, wrapping his arm around my waist. "Everything okay?" he asked, smiling like the world wasn't falling apart beneath us. Ruth just nodded, and I, fool that I was, smiled back. We left that night for the cabin near Lake Mead, our little honeymoon. He drove, quiet the whole way. I thought maybe he was tired, or maybe he was overwhelmed. I tried to fill the silence with stories about the guests, about how Mama cried when she saw me in my dress, about how the desert light hit the chapel window just right when we said "I do." He smiled once, faintly, but never met my eyes. When we reached the cabin, I went to unpack. That's when I saw it. His phone on the counter, screen lit. A message from April. 3 words. "I can't do this." And then, "You promise me you tell her." I froze. The whole world tilted. I could hear my heart louder than the desert outside. He came in, saw me holding his phone, and for a long time, neither of us spoke. He didn't deny it, didn't explain, didn't reach for me. Just sat down on the edge of the bed like the truth had been waiting there all along. Finally, he said, "It wasn't supposed to go this far." Those were his words. Not "I'm sorry," not "let me explain," not "I love you," just that. I asked quietly, "Who is she?" He looked at the floor. "She was someone before you." "And after me?" Silence. That was my answer. The next morning, I packed my things. No shouting, no scene, just quiet. He tried to stop me once, reaching for my arm, but I looked at him the way he used to look at the horizon, with distance. He let go. As I stepped outside, the desert wind hit my face, hot and clean. It didn't cool me down, but it cleared me. I drove back home still in my wedding dress, veil crumpled on the passenger seat, the radio off. Somewhere between Lake Mead and Henderson, the tears finally came, soft, steady, soundless. And I remember thinking, maybe this is what it means to start over, not by choice, but by survival. When I pulled into my mother's driveway, she ran outside, panic in her face. "What happened?" she asked. I couldn't find words, so I just shook my head. Ruth appeared behind her, crying already. She must have known. She took my hand, whispered, "I tried to tell you, Clara. I tried." Inside, the wedding cake sat untouched on the table. I took a knife and cut a single slice and sat down to eat it, slowly, quietly, deliberately, because I wanted to prove to myself that I could still taste sweetness, even in ruin. And that's how my marriage ended, less than a day after it began. Tell me in the comments, have you ever felt something break before the truth was even spoken? Tap the heart if you've ever smiled to hide pain no one saw. Would you have left or tried to forgive? Have you ever realized love wasn't what you thought it was right when you needed it most? People think the worst part of heartbreak is the moment it happens, the crash, the words, the truth. But that's not it. The worst part comes after, in the quiet that follows, when the house still smells like him, when the vows still echo in your head like a prayer that never got answered. That's what the days after my wedding felt like. A silence so loud it shook the walls. I didn't tell anyone much. In a town like ours, gossip doesn't spread, it gallops. By Monday, everyone already knew something had gone wrong. They just didn't know what. The cashier at the grocery store looked at my bare ring finger and said, "Heard you two left town early." I just smiled and said, "Desert weather wasn't for us." It wasn't a lie. The heat has a way of showing what can't survive it. Ruth came by every evening after work. She didn't ask questions. She just sat with me, sometimes bringing pie, sometimes silence. One night, I finally asked, "How long did you know?" Her eyes filled fast, the way Nevada skies do before a storm that never comes. She said she didn't know for sure. She only knew enough to be afraid for you. Afraid of what? Of how much you loved him. She told me she'd seen April once, weeks before the wedding, in town, at the diner. She walked in wearing one of David's old denim jackets, the kind with his company logo stitched on the chest. She said she looked lost. Said she ordered coffee and just stared out the window for an hour. When Ruth asked if she was okay, the woman said, "He promised me a future." At the time, Ruth thought it was just small-town heartbreak. She didn't realize the he was my fiancé. After Ruth left that night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room with the lamp off, the desert moonlight cutting pale stripes through the blinds. The whole house felt too big. Every sound a memory. The tick of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint echo of laughter that wasn't there anymore. I wanted to hate him. I tried. But hate's too loud for someone like me. So instead, I painted. I found the biggest canvas I had, a blank one I had been saving for after the wedding. And I started painting what the silence felt like. Not faces, not places, just color. Deep browns, gold dust, ash gray. The palette of endings. 3 nights later, I drove out to the highway. No destination, just distance. The desert at night looks endless. Black mountains, stars that don't blink. I stopped at an old gas station and bought a bottle of water and a pack of mints. When I came out, a man in his 50s was sitting by the vending machine, smoking. He nodded toward the wedding dress hanging in my backseat. I hadn't had the heart to move it. He asked, "You leave him or he leave you?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Both." He laughed softly. "Good. Means you got sense and mercy." Sometimes wisdom comes from strangers with dirt on their boots. When I got home, Mama was waiting on the porch. She'd come over after Ruth called her. She didn't scold, didn't pry. She just said, "Honey, when the desert takes something, it always leaves a truth in its place." I asked her what she meant. She just smiled that sad little smile she used when life got too big for words. She said, "You'll see. You always do." The next morning, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name, Mrs. Clara Lane, written in neat and careful handwriting. Inside was a short note. "He lied to both of us. I thought you should know I never meant to ruin your day. He told me you were gone long before you were. I'm sorry. April." No anger, no excuses, just apology, written in ink that had smudged from tears. I read it twice, then folded it back into the envelope. There was nothing left to say, but something shifted inside me, the way sand shifts when wind changes direction. For the first time since the wedding, I didn't feel hollow. I felt awake. 2 weeks later, I went back to the school. The principal had left flowers on my desk, a quiet sympathy wrapped in ribbon. My students didn't ask questions. Kids know when to stay gentle. One of them, a girl named Sophie, left a drawing on my table before class started. It was a drawing of a desert flower blooming through cracked ground.
At the bottom, she had written, "For when things still grow." That drawing nearly broke me, not from sadness, but from grace. That night, I sat on the back steps of my house, looking at the horizon. The desert was purple and gold, fading slow into darkness. And for the first time in weeks, I spoke out loud, not to David, not to April, but to myself. "You're still here." The wind picked up, soft and warm, carrying the scent of sage. It felt like an answer. The next morning, I drove out to the chapel. It was empty now. No flowers, no guests, no noise. Just echoes. The pews creaked when I walked in. I went straight to the front and stood where I'd once said, "I do." There's something sacred about revisiting pain after you survived it. It looks smaller, more human. I whispered, "You didn't take me with you, David. You just left the parts that never belonged to you anyway." Then I laid my bouquet, dried now, petals brittle, on the altar and walked away. Outside, the sky was wide and endless, the way Nevada skies always are. And somewhere between the church steps and my car, I realized I didn't feel broken anymore, just emptied, like a vessel ready for something real.
Time moves differently after betrayal. Days don't pass. They unfold. Like dust storms, you just have to wait out. And when they finally settle, the world looks almost the same, except you're not. In the months after my wedding, I lived small. I taught my classes, painted in the evenings, kept my circle quiet. Mama, Ruth, a few students who saw the way sadness lingers on a person, even when she smiles. But something in me had changed. It wasn't bitterness. It was understanding, a kind of stillness that comes when you've cried yourself empty and find there's still breath left. By spring, the desert started to bloom again. Tiny bursts of color pushing through cracked ground. I'd drive out past the old highway after school, park by the dry lake bed, and paint. Not people, not even places, just emotions. Blues that bled into gray, oranges that refused to fade. It was therapy without language. People started to notice. One of my students told her aunt, who ran the little gallery in town, about Miss Moore's paintings that look like feelings. The aunt stopped by one afternoon, saw them leaning against my walls, and said, "You ever thought of showing these?" I almost laughed. Who would want to look at someone else's heartbreak? But she insisted. So I said yes. The night of the show, the gallery smelled like lemon oil and new beginnings. Half the town came, partly out of curiosity, partly because small towns will always come to see what they've been whispering about. I stood by my work, nervous, bare-handed, no ring, no mask, just me. One painting in particular caught everyone's eye. It was large, wide strokes of ochre and rust red, with a single pale streak through the middle. Someone asked what it meant. I said, "It's the moment you stop running from what broke you." That night, for the first time in a long while, I went home light. A few weeks later, I got another letter. Same handwriting, same sender. April. "Clara, I've moved to Arizona. I didn't mean to write again, but I found something of his that I think belongs to you, a sketchbook. He said you inspired him to start drawing again. Maybe it'll help you understand him, or at least yourself. April." The envelope was thick. Inside was an old spiral-bound sketch pad, pages curled at the edges. I sat at my kitchen table and opened it. His drawings were rough. Pencil, charcoal, a few watercolor stains. Most were landscapes. Hills, power lines, sunsets. But near the back, there was one that stopped me. A portrait of me, or at least the woman he must have seen when he loved me. My face, soft and unfinished, no eyes, just outlines, like he didn't know how to finish seeing me. On the last page, he'd written, "I wish I were half as honest as the way she paints." For a long time, I just stared at those words. They didn't heal me. They didn't hurt me either. They just made sense, a kind of sad clarity I'd been waiting for. I closed the book and whispered, "Goodbye." And that was the first time I meant it. That weekend, I drove out to Lake Mead, the same place we'd gone for our wedding night. The cabin was empty now, shuttered, the sign half faded. I parked near the shore, the water low from drought. I sat on the hood of my car and watched the wind carve ripples across the lake's surface. I took the sketchbook, tore out the last page, and folded it gently. Then I threw the rest into the trash bin beside the parking lot. The paper caught the breeze, fluttering like something finally set free. That night back home, I dreamed of my younger self, the girl who still believed in forever. She was standing in the chapel, barefoot, veil in her hand, looking at me like I owed her something. I told her, "You didn't do anything wrong." She smiled, and then she walked away. When I woke up, I felt lighter, like forgiveness had found its way in while I slept. As summer came, life started to stretch open again. The school invited me to start an art program for adults on weekends. I said yes, though the thought scared me. Vulnerability has a way of making you brave without asking permission. The first day, 6 women showed up. Widows, divorcees, one who said she was just bored. We painted quietly at first. But as the weeks went by, the silence began to fill with stories. Not loud ones, whispered ones. About starting over, about leaving, about learning to be alone without being lonely. One evening, a woman named Marie looked up from her canvas and said, "Funny how we all came here thinking we lost something, and maybe we just needed space to find it again." That line stayed with me. Maybe that's what healing really is, not erasing what happened, but creating enough space for peace to exist beside it. That August, the gallery owner called again. She wanted to do a second show, this time featuring my students' work. I agreed, and on opening night, I stood in that same room again. Same lemon oil, same small town faces, but this time, I wasn't the one being looked at. I was just part of the light around them. When the night ended, Ruth hugged me tight and whispered, "You found yourself again, didn't you?" I said, "No, Ruth. I built her." As the crowd thinned, I stepped outside. The Nevada night was warm and full of crickets. I looked up, and for the first time in years, I felt grateful. Not for what I lost, but for what the loss taught me. Because somewhere between heartbreak and healing, I discovered something quiet and sacred, that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it paints. Sometimes it breathes. Sometimes it just survives. By the time autumn came again, the desert had softened. The air was cooler, the sunsets gentler, not those fierce orange ones that looked like the world's on fire, but quiet lavender skies that fade without fuss. That's how my heart felt too, finally done burning. A year had passed since my wedding day, a year since the vows that never had a chance to mean anything. And somewhere between that first night of silence and this morning's calm, I'd learned that survival isn't loud. It's quiet. It's steady. It's choosing to open your blinds again pour your coffee, and step into another sunrise, even when your heart still trembles. I still lived in the same little house at the edge of town, the one with the creaky porch and the half-finished mural on the side. For months, I couldn't bring myself to touch that wall. But one afternoon in September, I finally did. I painted a single line of color, deep crimson, across the faded beige. Then another, and another, until the wall was covered in swirls of light and dust, heat and hope. It wasn't a masterpiece, it was a conversation between who I was and who I'd become. When the sun hit it in the evening, the colors glowed like embers. A neighbor walking by called out, "Looks like your wall's alive, Clara." I smiled. That's the point. The art classes grew. We added a children's group on Saturdays, and sometimes their laughter filled the hall so fully I had to step outside just to breathe it in. Ruth volunteered to help with supplies. Mama came every Thursday just to watch, saying she liked seeing color find people again. We started calling the class Second Chances Studio. Someone suggested printing that on the window, and the name stuck. Every person who walked through those doors brought something broken with them, a story, a scar, a silence. And every week, I watched them lay it down on the canvas, piece by piece, until it looked like healing. One afternoon, near the end of class, a woman I didn't know stood at the door. She was holding something wrapped in brown paper. "Miss Moore?" she asked softly. "I'm April's sister." For a moment, I couldn't speak. She stepped closer, offering the package. She said, "She passed away last month. She wanted you to have this." My breath caught. The room seemed to still around us. When she left, I sat alone and unwrapped it. Inside was a painting. It was mine, or at least it was me through her eyes. A woman standing in the desert, facing the wind, her hair tangled, her shadow long and steady. On the back was a note in April's handwriting. "You were never my enemy. You were the one who reminded me we both deserved better." I pressed the note to my chest and cried, not out of pain, but recognition. Sometimes forgiveness travels farther than we ever expect it to. A week later, I hung April's painting in the studio, right near the front. Underneath, I placed a small card that read, "Art born from truth." People would stop to look at it, some asking who painted it. I always said the same thing. Someone who learned the hard way that love isn't ownership, it's release. As the year wound down, I found myself spending more time outdoors again. The desert that once felt empty now felt endless, not lonely, just vast enough to hold everything I'd learned. I'd walk at dusk, when the air turned gold and the sky blushed against the mountains. Sometimes I'd stop at the old chapel, still empty, but never forgotten. One evening, I brought a single white rose and placed it on the front step. Not for David, not even for what we lost, but for the version of me that survived it. Standing there, I realized I wasn't angry anymore, not even sad, just grateful for the wreckage that cleared a path. The next morning, I opened my windows to a soft breeze, carrying the smell of sage and rain, rare in Nevada, but always a blessing. I poured my coffee into the same mug I'd used since that day and smiled. There was peace in the routine, peace in the quiet, peace in knowing I didn't need to be anyone's bride to feel whole. For so long, I thought my story ended at the altar, but maybe it was never about marriage at all. Maybe it was about learning how to stay true to yourself when everything else walks away. A few months later, a local journalist asked to feature our studio in the county magazine. She interviewed me for an hour. Questions about the community, the art, the healing. At the end, she asked, "If you could go back to that wedding day, what would you tell your younger self?" I thought for a moment and said, "I'd tell her that losing everything isn't the same as losing yourself. Sometimes it's how you find what can't be taken." She smiled, writing that down word for word. When the article came out, that line became the headline. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't hide from my own story. I shared it. The mural on my house is finished now. It stretches across the whole side, reds and golds and white streaks of light that look like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. At the bottom, in small letters, I painted a phrase my mother used to say when life felt too heavy. "What the desert takes, it teaches." Every day when I pull into my driveway, I see it glowing in the Nevada sun, and I remember how far I've come, not by escaping pain, but by walking straight through it. That winter, I started keeping a small notebook on my bedside table. At the end of each day, I'd write one sentence that captured something true. Little things, like, "I laughed today without remembering why." The sky turned pink over the valley, and I didn't wish for anything more. I'm not healed, but I'm free. Those pages became my new vows, not to anyone else, but to myself. On the anniversary of my wedding, I didn't hide. I didn't cry. I just drove out to the lake, the same place everything fell apart, and now the place I finally felt whole. The air was still, the water low, the world quiet. I sat on the hood of my car, closed my eyes, and whispered, "You didn't take my soul. You just helped me find it." The wind rose gently, carrying my words out over the water. And I swear, it sounded like applause. Some stories don't end where they break. They end where the person who survived decides to start again. I thought my wedding was supposed to be the most beautiful day of my life. But beauty doesn't always wear white. Sometimes it's covered in dust and paint, with hands that have learned to hold peace instead of promises. Because when everything else is gone, the ring, the vows, the name, what's left is your soul. And that's the part no one can ever take. Because here, on True Life Stories, we don't just tell stories, we remember them. Subscribe, stay with us, and help the silence end, one true story at a time.